first question, I like clarification. I'm a teacher, it's what I do. So my first question for the panel, jump in wherever, I'm cool because I'm going to ask all of you the same question. When you think of non-genetic magic systems, what comes to mind? What do you think of?
Many things. I don't have one single one to start with. Honestly, the thing that I guess I'll start with is an idea that I think I got from Ted Chiang when he was on some panel at some World Fantasy the Cons Blur Together, which is that the distinguishing thing about magic, in his view, and I like this way of looking at it, is that it includes some kind of personal element. That there is some way in which the person who is performing the magic is like relevant to what they're doing. Because if it's, the science end of things, then it's anybody who follows the following steps, they get the exact same result, and it doesn't have that personal element. So I can think, and we'll probably talk about several different ways that can happen, but that's kind of what I think of is that personal component to it.
I've actually talked about this a little bit, kind of in my class, and relating how I've thought about magic systems a lot, if you are not surprised by that, yeah. And one of the things I think about is just I like interesting and different ways to obtain magic. It's one of the things that is fascinating to me. And there's two general big schools of I wouldn't say thought on this because it's not like writers really love one or another. We just use the tool that is right for the story. But the genetic magic systems is a big component of fantasy. It's your Harry Potter, right? It's your, this person, it indicates a chosen destiny. It kind of goes all the way back to the Greek myths and things like this idea that you are born with some untapped potential. And there's a power in that, right? A narrative power. And it is interesting and can be written in a really fun way because it can be a metaphor for the untapped potential that we all have. But it's also a little uncomfortable if you look at it too long and too hard. And it's a metaphor. You can do it in a way that's not. But if you think about it, you're like, ugh, boy. Some people are born with this magical talent, and they are just better than other people, and some people just aren't born with it. And that has implications, capital I. And the other school of thought is this: you are trained to use magic. The kind of classic Dungeons and Dragons, anyone can be a wizard. You go and you study at the wizard school. Harry Potter does that too, but you kind of have to have the genetic predisposition first. And I like kind of the fuzzy areas between both of these large camps, right? And what are some non-genetic ways of getting magic that are different, that are not just you go to wizard school, though I do like wizard school. Like, none of these are bad. Depends on how you use them and what the tool is. And so that's what I think of. I think of all those fun kind of fuzzy areas between the two big schools of where you get your magic and what can you come up with that's different. And I just like different and interesting things that do different and interesting things for my stories.
I'm thinking about, and I've been thinking about this, actually, the whole drive down I was thinking about this, because I signed up for the panel, and then I was thinking, yeah, but everything you do has a genetic component. So how are you going to talk about this? And that's not quite true. I have a couple of series that don't, but as Brandon says, it's a gradation. There are really heavily, it's obviously genetic. With the Harry Potter, mom and dad, and there's no getting around it. He inherited the family business. But what comes to mind for me as a writer is something that a friend of mine who's an editor once said to me. His name's Edmund Schubert. He used to edit the Intergalactic Medicine Show. He's a terrific editor and a really good guy and a very good writer. One of the things he said was that he liked to think about writers starting out with a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that they are allowed by their readers, that their readers will grant them. And he talked about it in money terms. He said you start out with $1's worth. And you don't want to spend too much of that dollar in any one place because you're going to need it along the way. And so I guess where I settled as I was thinking about this was genetic, non-genetic, as long as in the world building and in the character point of view conveyance of your world building, you can make your magic system feel and seem believable and logical and an inherent part of the world that you've created without expending more than 20 cents of your dollar that you're going to need for the book. You're doing all right. But if you're set on doing a non-genetic, but in order to explain it, you have to bend over backwards in terms of suspension of disbelief for your reader, you're creating problems for yourself.
That's a really interesting way of thinking of it.
I do want to make one small distinction here, which is that there can be a difference between something being inborn and something being inherited. Because it's possible that, like, you have magical gifts because you were born under the right arrangement of stars, like it's
That's
an
a good
astrological
point.
thing.
Yeah.
But your parents didn't have that.
Yeah.
So those are slightly separate things.
See, that's one of those little gray areas, but between gray is the wrong term, but those fuzzy areas. I like this dollar thing, though I would make the argument that, number one, different genres give you a different amount, right? Sure. This is why it's, like, for instance, Harry Potter comes up again and again as a good example of this. You have in middle grade, you have like 40 cents instead of $1, right? Which is why so much middle grade is portal fantasies, because a portal fantasy uses up, it just eases you in, it has a shallow learning curve, and a genetic magic system is really cheap in that. You're like, hey, you're born with this talent because your parents were wizards. Okay, that makes sense.
Right, and I still have 97 cents in my pocket.
Exactly, yeah. Uh-huh. But if you're writing a giant epic fantasy, you get more dollars to spend, so to speak.
All right, which is interesting because my next question was, what has to happen in order for a magic system to be believable, and how is it different for something that is non-genetic?
I think what makes it believable is to some extent going to vary depending on your audience, because not everybody is going to buy into the same things. There are some people who want really clear-cut rules, and as long as you give them those rules, they're on board. But that's not necessarily the believability. It's how are you getting them to buy into it, which I think is a slightly different thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a tone thing here too, right? Yes. Like, it's kind of interesting. This is magic systems. We talk about them for fantasy, but I have not seen the Fast and the Furious movies.
I actually have.
My friends are showing them to me one at a time, right?
We did a marathon. That was a cool way of doing it.
And we just watched Fast 5, which is where they really start being fantasy movies, right? And it's the best one so far, right? And it's just absolutely ridiculous. But there are other films that I will watch that will try to pull a stunt like that, and I'm not as much on board, right? It depends on what you're trying to convince me of. And I won't give spoilers, but I really liked Black Widow, but Black Widow tries very hard to be like, this is a serious spy world, and this is a character without superpowers. And so when the ridiculous things happen, it kicks me out a little bit more, even when they're not nearly as ridiculous as the really weird stuff that happens in Fast and the Furious, because they're like, there's no physics in this world, just ignore it.
So I also don't want to give spoilers, but the most recent movie literally has a line where one of the characters goes off on how, like, as long as, the numbers work out, as long as we obey the laws of physics, and I'm like, how big is that lampshade you just hung on what you're doing? Because in that one, it is being so thoroughly tongue-in-cheek. I'm not going to give away what they're doing at that point, but anybody who's seen the movie knows, no, the laws of physics are weeping tears of blood at what you're doing. But you're being so over the top and gung-ho. You know what? I'm on board. Go for it.
But we love it so much.
So your tone of your story is going to really influence what is believable.
I also think it gets tricky when we start using movie examples, because I think you can get away with so much more on the screen than you can in a book.
And they don't have the same requirements of exposition that a novel does.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I mean, the thing that drives me nuts, the thing that kicks me out of a fantasy novel when I'm reading one, is when the rules change. I think if you establish laws of magic the way you would establish laws of physics, laws of gravity, and make them immutable, but stretchable. Because, I mean, the whole point of every bad guy has been to take a magic system and take it to its ultimate extreme and use it in a way that it was never meant to be used for evil purposes. And then your good guy has to find a way within the rules to defeat the bad guy, right? So it can be stretchable, but you can't change the physics of it once you've established them. And when you do that, it drives, well,
Yeah.
Though
I don't know if you lose all your readers, but you're going to lose me. I'm just saying.
I will say we do tend to talk about this sort of thing in terms of magic systems and what are the rules and the laws of it. And my personal taste actually tends more towards the things that are numinous and don't have, like, you know, a gaming book that you could write out that says, okay, here's the dice you roll and your % chance of success and so forth. It's just like what I respond to aesthetically. But there is still, for me, what I end up thinking about is that the underlying logic of it, rather than being a clear, like, mathematical science kind of rules, it's more of like symbolic logic, symbolic rules, and that's harder to get, you know, clear cut with, and what one person buys into and what another person does will vary more. But there definitely have been things I read where I'm like, okay, this felt like it was hanging together in that subconscious symbolic way, and then you threw something completely unrelated in there, and I'm kicked out in exactly the same way that you're describing, just a little bit fuzzier in how it goes.
Yeah, some of the really great soft magic systems they do it a little differently, but they still, like you said, like, one of my favorite things that often shows up in soft magic systems is magic is dangerous, magic has a terrible cost, we can't control it, right? And this is a great sort of rule, quote unquote, for a soft magic system, because you can do anything, but then you just have to justify it with a cost. And the reader's going to be on board as long as afterward they're like, yeah, that was a cost. That was a huge cost. They got, you know, you often in these cases use magic to get yourself out of an immediate problem and make a much larger long-term problem. And readers just are totally on board for that sort of thing, because anything that makes the life harder for the characters generally is we're gonna buy into.
Brandon, can you stop for a minute and define soft magic?
Hard and soft.
Yeah.
So a hard magic system, by my definitions, these things are just for ease of conversation. They do not have to be like strict, you have to follow, but I talk about them as a hard magic system is a magic system that is explained such that when the characters are problem solving with the magic, the reader could have guessed how they would achieve that problem solving, right? Meaning you foreshadow how the magic works, there's a problem, the character then uses the tools of the magic to solve that problem. And I call a soft magic system this sort of one where you don't know all the specific rules. You know that magic exists, you know that things can happen, and the main purpose of a soft magic system is this kind of sense of wonder. I put them in a balancing act, right? You've got this ability to problem solve and this sense of wonder, and there's a lot of wiggle room in between. But for me, as a soft magic system is not rule-based. It's like emotion-based in many ways, like what the effect it has on the reader. Rather than logic, you're kind of shooting for tone and emotion, and a lot of these soft magics are about making characters feel small. Can the protagonist use the magic reliably to solve problems, or is the magic a thing that the main characters don't quite understand and can't quite use? And I usually use the example, the One Ring is a hard magic and Gandalf's magic is a soft magic, right? We know exactly what the One Ring does, well, you know, in the narrative terms. We know the costs, we know how Frodo can use it to problem solve, and we know what it's going to do. We don't know what Gandalf can do, he's just cool. He's right. He's there to make it to give a frame of reference for, oh, the hobbits really are small because there's a demigod walking around and he does stuff with light and can fight Balrogs, but we're not sure how. But whenever Gandalf is used, it's used in this very kind of mysterious way, and it often has like a big cost, such as we no longer have Gandalf because he's got to go fight a Balrog. So those are just kind of my loose definitions of them.
Yeah, my favorite example of that is, y'all that know me are about to laugh. In the Wheel of Time, you know, the White Tower hierarchy is based on how strong they are. But how do you know who's stronger? Oh, they just feel it. Yeah, I have to admit that made me go, but. So how is it different when we're talking about those, is there anything different about it not being a genetic-based system or, some kind of, internal thing? Is there a difference when you're building the system to make it believable? Like, how does it not being genetic affect that?
I think it depends on which direction you're going with what is the basis of it, because if you have a system where your magical power is based around having gone through like initiations, and you can repeat the exact same actions as somebody who has gone through the initiation, but if you haven't, then it's not going to work for you. It'd be the equivalent of like, if I perform the same chemistry experiment as somebody with a chem PhD, doesn't matter if I did it right, it's not going to happen because I don't have the PhD. Something like that. That's very clear-cut, that's very like straightforward, and it's easy to show the reader, this person is a third-level initiate, therefore they are able to do these things, as opposed to, and this is one I've gotten into discussions about around the topic of gaming, something where it's more about like your spiritual purity, and if you are impure, then things may not work correctly because you are not sufficiently in harmony with the cosmos. That's a lot fuzzier. That's a lot harder to kind of negotiate. How do I convince the reader that what I'm saying here, like, yes, this character is sufficiently pure at this moment to make it happen, but no, that thing they did, they are now defiled and they cannot do this thing. That's fuzzier and harder to sell.
I would agree with that. Though I'm going to say for me, I don't think that this is a really big deal.
No, it's just sort of how do you approach it.
I think saying, oh, he went to wizard school, so he's a wizard, or he was born a wizard, so he's a wizard, or she has, this initiation. I don't think narratively that has much of a difference at all. It depends on, this is just it's part of your larger world building. It's part of your learning curve. And I don't think this line of explanation is the hard one. I think all the stuff surrounding it, and you have to do that whether it's genetic or not, to make it work.
That actually makes me think, I don't think it's a problem for the reader. I think it's a problem for the writer. Because you're in that thing where you're like, I really need the character to be able to do X, but he just waded hip deep in blood because he was in a battle, so he's completely defiled. Crap, how do I get this to work?
Yeah.
It's a problem in drafting, not in
true.
reading as much.
Yeah. But, yeah. I was going to say, if your magic comes from purity, it could still be genetic, right?
Sure, it could be.
Right? Like, the fact that it's genetic is not the hard part, or that it's not genetic. If you're pure, you can use the magic, but you got the magic because you were initiated, or you got the magic because it's genetic or whatever. The hard part is not whether it's genetic or not. The hard part is then the limitation you've placed on the magic, which is also what makes it interesting, right? And a lot of times, the limitations you place on yourself, that magic you described there is just infinitely more interesting already than a lot of magic systems that you run across in books, because the characters have to be working to maintain their magic and these sorts of things. And it just makes it really fun.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes back, all of these questions for me come back to point of view and staying true to the character's voice, because yes, as a writer, we have to figure this stuff out, but if we've drawn our characters and made them creatures of the world in which we've placed them, they're going to have an intuitive understanding of how these things work, and conveying that to the reader through their point of view actually makes it easier, because it makes sense to the character. And to a certain degree, if you've created a relationship of trust between your point of view character and your reader, then the character's faith, be it in a religion or in magic or in the physics of the world that mean that the sun's going to rise in the west instead of in the east, those things are easier to convey, and they're easier to convince the reader of. And it all comes back down to making your characters believable and using them to communicate your worlds in a way that captures the reader and brings the reader along for the ride. Because the reader when it comes right down to it, the readers want to believe. Readers don't come into a story thinking, I'm going to pick this sucker apart. They come into a story thinking, I want to be transported. I want to believe this stuff. And so in those moments that we talked about before where the reader is kicked out, that's a failure of narrative, it's a failure of point of view. Because the reader wasn't looking to be kicked out, and the reader wasn't looking to trip you up. The reader wanted something from you, and you didn't deliver.
Yeah. Hence our example of things like the Fast and the Furious movies. Like, if you get me on board with other things, I'm not honestly going to let so much else slide because I'm having fun and I don't care.
Okay, so examples of authors that did the believability correctly.
I'm just going to spin this one. I think we've really killed believability. I'm going to spin this to people who did interesting non-genetic magic systems and why they're interesting. Because when I'm looking at, if I'm going to do one of the non-two defaults, wizard school or genetic, there's the question of why, right? Why am I doing this? Why am I looking to do this? And the answer for me is usually, well, number one, let's do something different, right? Different is its own reward to an extent. You can't go too far in that, right? Like you still have to present something that is interesting and different. It's as I often say, it's very easy to be different and bad, right? It's like I'm going to write my book backward. Each word is going to be reversed. It's different, right? Okay, why? Yeah, but at the same time, I look at it and say, what are the implications I do want to deal with? Because I said there's like capital I implications for genetic. There's capital I implications for every kind of magic, right? And do you want to deal with them? Do you not want to deal with them? One of my favorites of all time is The Rune Lords by David Farland for a magic system that is non-genetic and really interesting. If you haven't read this series, the magic system is based around you have these branding irons. And you can brand someone and steal an attribute from them. It's more like I think they have to give it willingly in the magic system. So it makes it work. It's an economic magic system. It's I can give up my strength, and then this person will pay basically me a salary that my family can live on because I no longer have strength. I'm bedridden. But the other person is now twice as strong, and they're going to be a soldier in the city to protect the city, right? And so you get this whole economics that also has capital I implications because it can go real wrong real fast.
I was going to say exploitation.
Yeah.
Wow, so many possibilities.
And that's the as David said, like the story is about someone exploiting this magic system for very evil means, and the protagonist working within the rules of the magic system to stop them. That's like a classic example right there. And why do I like this magic system? Because of the things about it that are uncomfortable, right? Because they also have cool metaphors for our world doing a lot of the same things. It's just you can, in a fantasy world, you can do this fantastical version of it that lets you deal with some of these things. And it's really interesting, right? It's an interesting magic system that asks some interesting questions, that it has rules that the narrative has to deal with in ways that I just had never seen in a magic system before. So it's a lot of fun to read that magic system for that very reason. And so that's one that I like that's not genetic and why I like it.
The Rune Lords, was that it?
Yes, The Rune Lords by David Farland.
Oh, yeah.
The first book is called The Sum of All Men.
So I'm gonna go with Brandon's "It's Different" thing because the book that came to mind is very different. It's one I talk about a lot at conventions because it's one of the best fantasies I've ever read. It's Guy Gavriel Kay's Tigana.
Yeah.
And in terms of the people who do the magic, you're never really sure whether they got it genetically or how they got it. But the effect of the magic, the major magic in this, is national instead of biological. So he's not evil, he's a conqueror. And his son is killed in the war in which he conquers a land, and he punishes those who killed his son by making it so that no one who wasn't born in this country will ever hear the country's name spoken again. And so these people, and it only affects those who lived in Tigana when his son died. But if you were a resident of the country at that moment, a citizen of the country at that moment, and you speak the name of your country to somebody who wasn't, they can't hear what you said. They will never, the name of your country is dead. And that to me is just, I mean, it's a metaphor for what was going on in Eastern Europe during the 80s, and other things as well. I mean, it's a metaphor for genocide. It's a metaphor for all sorts of things. But just as a narrative tool and a narrative point, it is just so brilliant and so poignant.
I consider Tagana the single greatest one-volume epic fantasy ever written.
Yes, as do I. But I didn't want to say that with two guests of honor on the you just
I've only recently committed single-volume novel, so it's safe. It's actually a little hard for me to think of answers to this because, honestly, a lot of the books that I like the best are ones where there isn't a distinct magic system that feels like this, thing that sits there being its own thing. Instead, and this is because my background is all in like anthropology and folklore, a lot of what I like to read is something where it's just kind of part of the culture in a more integrated fashion rather than being a discrete unit sitting off to one side. Which then means, like, not that I couldn't answer with some of those things, but when I try to remember what they are, they all fly straight out of my head. But because I just finished reading it, there's a book coming out next month by J.T. Greathouse called The Hand of the Sun King. And that one's interesting because, from what I can tell, it's the first book of a trilogy, and so I don't know if other things later will complicate this, but it is something where the different types of magic are linked, like ethnically linked, which is to say they belong to a certain people. But within that, it doesn't seem to be inborn. Instead, it's a process of initiation in all the ones that I've seen so far in that first book. That basically, if you get initiated by somebody who is already part of this tradition and all of them involve a mark being put on you somehow, then you have access to this magic. But the thing that complicates it is you've got an empire, which is expanding, and the emperor of that nation has been doing stuff to basically like assimilate the magics of the people they conquer into his system of magic in ways that obviously you can immediately start reading all kinds of interesting colonial implications and such into this. And so I found that an interesting balance where there was sort of this like, cultural ethnic connection, but it's not, by dint of being born to that ethnicity, you have access to this magic, because that gets problematic super fast. Or raises interesting questions about people who are, like the main character actually is of mixed ethnicity, so that would raise questions there. But because it has that initiation barrier, then it becomes more, have you acculturated to this stuff and learned the things from the people who know it?
That's my favorite part. Everybody on the panel just looks at me like, okay, what?
Yeah. Throw us our next treat so that we will perform our next trick.
All right. Now I need M&Ms.
It would work so much better without the masks.
It would totally. Like, if you catch it, you get to answer twice. So here's my last really broad question, and then I'm going to throw it out to y'all. I apologize. What is your soapbox issue, the thing that drives you the most crazy about fantasy and magic systems? Go.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I do either, right? Like, I have 3 essays on kind of Brandon's rules of magic, right? And they all came from stuff I did wrong, not from things that bother me about others. Does that make sense? When I wrote something wrong and I'm like, why did that not turn out the way I wanted it to turn out? I sat down and I thought about it. I'm like, well, I think this is the problem. And I started practicing. I'm like, yeah, that was the problem. So I wrote an essay that basically kind of explains, hey, here's a thing Brandon learned about writing magic systems in his way when he did it wrong once. And so I focus, like, the thing about it is, like, the pet peeves regarding magic systems are just going to be pet peeves regarding narrative. Like David said, right? When you don't foreshadow, when you get your characters into a problem, and then you have to break the rules of your magic in order to get them out of the problem, because it is a pet peeve to me for 2 reasons. Number one, you just, it's not fun to read. But number 2, it's so easy to go back and be like, wow, I could not find a way out of this situation. As an author, I can revise to either not put them in that situation or to make this part of the magic system or the world building a feature instead of a bug, and make my story turn on this moment instead. And so yeah, it's a pet peeve about magic, but it's really just a pet peeve about proper foreshadowing, right? Like, you can have that happen in any book, regardless of whether there's overt magic or not. And so, I don't know, I mean, it's less a pet peeve, but again, looking back at myself, the first magics that I wrote were all just naturally genetic magic systems. Why? I'd read a bunch of epic fantasy. I didn't stop and think about why I was doing this, and these are all unpublished novels, right? But when I look back at, my first couple of epic fantasies, they all just straight up, oh yeah, you're just born with it. And that can be really interesting, but I wasn't using it in an interesting way. And so asking myself why I'm using the magic, it led to my first book that got published, right? Which was, magic instead of something you're born with, it's a curse that afflicts you. That it seems to happen randomly, and that was more fun to write. And I'm like, why is this more fun to write? Why is this a more interesting novel? Why is this one so much better than the previous ones that I tried to write? And the answer was that I thought about it. Not that it was that I picked a non-genetic magic system, it's just that I was doing it intentionally to make it a feature of the story. So I guess if I have a pet peeve, it's a pet peeve at my younger self for taking so long to figure that out. It took 6 books.
Yeah, I think along with that, I would say, anything, whether it's genetic or otherwise, where you can tell the author was just kind of like plugging in something from central casting. I most often think I see this where it's like, basically D&D magic. And I'm like, I have nothing against D&D. I played a lot of games, but don't just port that straight in and not think about it and not do anything interesting with it. Corollary to that, and this is actually in one of the Pathfinder games I'm playing right now, if you've got magic that can do certain things, and then the really obvious applications of, but why doesn't anybody ever use it for blah, that would be super helpful, and it's right there. Anybody who knows the Kingmaker adventure path, so we're running our own kingdom, and we're doing things like, all right, well, there's this purify food and drink thing that's like, really cheap, right? And you can make a continuous magic item, and you just put it on your sewer outflow, and there you go, water purification solved, you don't have infectious diseases, cool. Plant growth blesses a field for a year so that it produces 1/3 more crops. Okay, we're going to make us one of those and go around the kingdom, bless every field. Great, we are producing more food off of our acreage. Like, when it's something like that you're looking at it going, but why doesn't anybody ever do this? It's cheap and it's right there and it would just solve a lot of problems. There can be reasons why people don't apply it, but I need you to believe in those reasons, not just because the author never thought of it.
Yeah, using RPGs are a great way to be like, okay, don't do this. They have to because it's a game. Right. But a lot of us grew up gaming, and because of that, those things worm their way into our books, and you will drive the economists mad reading your stories if you're not, if you're.
D&D is a wish-based economy, different panel. Got it. Okay.
And mine's a writing thing too. I mean, it's related to magic systems, but it's when your character is in the middle of a battle, that is not the time. Like, she threw the blankety blank spell, which was developed by Alistar the Alliterative back during the Wizard Wars of the, and all of a sudden when you're in a battle, when your character's in a battle, that's probably what they're thinking about, is the battle. And if you want to tell us about Alistar the Alliterative and all the spells that he created, that's great. But find another time to do it, not when your character is hanging by the tips of her fingernails trying to figure out how to survive.
I see this a lot in new writer writing because they've internalized that you need to start with some sort of action scene or something, right? They internalize, I need to start with a bang. So they do, but then they get a couple pages in, they're like, but I have to explain all this. And then suddenly you get this the page 1 was really exciting and action-filled, and pages 2 through 7 are these slogs of info dumps in the middle of the fight scene.
Now, I will say, pulling that trick sort of at the height of something later in the story, every so often you can pull that off as a matter of tone. You're like, thrilling battle, and now let me pause for a second. And I've seen authors do this, but it's very much a professional driver on a closed course. I don't recommend it as a...
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert Jordan was bad about it in the middle of fight scenes, telling you what sword forms they're using. Because they're totally thinking about, briars on a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do karate, and I can verify that my best sparring things, I have not been thinking at all. Like, brain just went away, the whole no-mind idea. Yep, by the time I saw an opening in the other guy's defense, I had already punched him through it, and I already had the point. I'm like, oh, I did a thing, okay.
All right. Is there anything that I haven't asked that y'all want to address?
I just outlined a non-genetic magic system that I think is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll mention that and just kind of why. I don't know if I'll ever get to write this book. I outline a lot of books I don't get to write. But I thought it was a really interesting idea that for a magic system where a child was chosen by society when they were a newborn to gain the powers, kind of for the good of society. And being one of these people instead, I thought like I said, the implications are really interesting for that narrative story. Is that you're forced to, even from childhood, you were chosen by everybody. You weren't born to it, but how do you choose a newborn? They just chose one, and now you've got to live the rest of your life. Yeah, hope you picked a good one, dealing with these implications, and that's been very interesting to outline and think about. The effects on the character, right? The thing to keep in mind is that, so as I always say, interesting world building and bland character is usually a bad story. Interesting character and bland world building is actually usually still a pretty good story, depending. Obviously, you want to have both. But if you're only going to have one, the one with the interesting, and even these breaks, we've brought up Harry Potter. Harry Potter is pretty good at being internally consistent for a given novel, and just terrible about being internally consistent between novels. And
Time Turner.
Yeah. Yeah, Polyjuice Potion, right? Yeah. Polyjuice Potion would solve so many problems. And they do at least mention it a couple times. Oh, we can't, but teleportation solves so many problems, they're just...
Or create so many problems if you look at it differently.
Yes, exactly. But it's the best-selling fantasy series of our time. And that's because characters, tone, narrative, plot, all of these things are excellent in a lot of these books. And so the fact that the world building breaks now and then doesn't ruin it.
And I will say, as sort of, this is my pet peeve about some of the Harry Potter stuff, and this goes back to the genetic thing, think through the implications of what it is that's going into the story, because Rowling tosses some stuff out that I'm like, wow, if you actually stop and think about it, that's awful.
Yes.
It was totally fine. They almost never caught any witches during the witch hunts, and the witches they did catch were able to get away. And I'm like, great, so all those people who died weren't witches and just died horribly, but we're not going to worry about that
could have
part.
stopped it.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
Yeah, so...
That's the big problem.
Yes,
there.
exactly. Yeah,
why didn't they stop this?
Yeah. There's literally a line where I think it's Arthur Weasley. It's a sympathetic character basically says, oh, well, we have to stay hidden because otherwise muggles would want us to solve all their problems for them. I'm like, God forbid you use these magic powers to help other people. So whether it's a genetic thing, whether it's initiation, purity, whatever it is, stop and think about what some of the ramifications of that are and be aware of them. Think through what that's going to mean in the longer term and either change it so you don't have the bad ramifications or look at them and say, okay, now let's make story out of that and acknowledge it.
Or I will give a third here. Acknowledge you couldn't tell the story you wanted to tell with it and just do a Fast and the Furious, which is kind of what Roland did. You know what?
If you get to high enough speeds, you can just pole vault over everything.
Yeah,
it worked for the Dukes.
Some narratives you do just have to acknowledge. I couldn't tell this story. And the way that I think Rowling, and again, I agree with you, but a way that I think that she makes it kind of okay is that from the very first book, the tone of Harry Potter was whimsical, right? The narrator is telling you a funny story. That one of the first lines is about how Mr. Weasley has not enough neck and Mrs. Weasley has too much neck. And the very narration is got a fairy tale sense to it and even I'm joking with you. And it allows at least me to be like, I'm in a middle grade fantasy. I am not an epic fantasy. I don't need this story to deal with the implications of some of the questions it's raising, because it's about a kid being transported to a magical fantasy land. It's an Alice in Wonderland story. And that allows me to shelve some of those things. It doesn't make them not issues. It doesn't make them above criticism. In fact, the criticism is really interesting because of them. But I don't know that the Harry Potter stories would be better if they dealt with them. Instead, I personally think, write them, and then let society talk and have criticism to talk about it.
I will counter-argue to that only that the tone changed over time, and that's
did.
why it bothered me more over time.
Yes,
Maybe
yes,
it's
it
also
absolutely
not.
did.
No, that's what I was going to. I mean, before when you were saying they're great books, I was thinking, well, unless you're a writer whose kids love them, and then you have to bite your tongue every time they say it's a great book, because it's like, well, no, it's not, and here's why. And
I will defend them. I think the Harry Potter books are excellent.
There is a lot that I think is excellent about them, but anyway. We're not going to turn this into that panel either.
I think they sold really well.
You want to take this? Do you think she gets away with it because Harry doesn't know either?
I mean, the fact that they're kids, and you can make the argument that society is dealing with these issues, they're just not putting it on the teens. But, I mean, we've all been teens. By the time you've gone through high school, you have been told about the implications of, like, at least you should have been, of a lot of this, like, maybe not the 11-year-olds, but the 17-year-olds. I mean, I had an entire class on the Vietnam conflict in my high school. It's like, you're going to learn about this, right? And so, I don't know.
All right, so, question.
This is kind of in line with what you have been talking about just now, but I wanted to explore this question. You can start with an idea of theme or an idea of character, or you can start with, this is a really cool magic system, I want to write about this. Where do you prefer to start? Do you prefer to start with a magic system and then say, what are the implications of this for my story? Or do you say, I want a character who encounters this sort of art, and because I'm in a reverse engineering magic story that serves that. Which way does it work best for you guys?
Can I start with that? For me, it varies with every project. Every project starts differently, and I always feel lucky that I got an idea and I don't dictate to my ideas how they ought to start. It's like every time I get an idea for a book, whether it's because a character came to me, or a magic system came to me, or a theme came to me, I'm grateful for the idea, and I'll build around it to all the other things that the story requires, because ideas, I mean, we all get lots of ideas, but the really good ones, there aren't that many of them, and you don't want to look them in the mouth too much. And so to me, I just say it's every story is different, and it presents itself differently.
I don't think I could have said that better. Yeah.
I will say for my part that usually the form of the question that I think all of us have probably been asked is, do you start with a character first or a plot? And my smart-ass answer is always a world, because I reject your false dichotomy. For me, the world often comes with at least some of that already kind of like built into it, because that's just kind of the direction my brain goes in. But, as David said, it does depend heavily on the project. Like, I've got one sort of back burner thing I'm working on that's riffing off of a short story I wrote. The short story doesn't really have any magic in it, and so then I'm like, okay, I've got this character and I've got a flavor, and now I need to figure out a bigger world to put this in, because what you need for a short story and what you need for a novel are very different. And so in that one, I am having to kind of figure out what's going to fit what I want to do, and I'm hoping I arrive at a good answer, because right now it's actually feeling very artificially constructed to me, and I don't like that. So.
Other questions?
Just a quick question for Brandon. Just wanted to see if that story you outlined, is that Cosmere or non-Cosmere? And then does sometimes the magic system you come up with seem really cool and you're like, okay, that can't be Cosmere because of this or that?
Yeah, so that one is Cosmere. So for those who aren't aware, my epic fantasies are in a shared universe. Well, shared's the wrong term. what do you call these things? A connected universe? Yeah, an MCU type thing. It's not a multiverse because it's not interdimensional, but it is a connected universe. And one of the main reasons that I wrote it that way is because I came up with some foundational fundamental rules of how a magic system works, and then I wanted to extrapolate that to different planets and different ways of dealing with it, and things like that. And it's pretty broad and loose so that I can do a lot of different things with it. I do frequently come up with things that don't fit, and I usually just file those away. One of the big things is I don't allow time travel and I don't allow interdimensional travel in the Cosmere. These are two cans of worms I'm just not going to open, at least time travel into the past, right? Where we can all time travel in the future. That's a feature of, of our dimension. But I file anything that has to do with those away, but there's just other things like, how a magic interacts with the laws of thermodynamics and things like that is different in the Cosmere than it might be somewhere else. Usually I save those ones that don't fit until I also have a story that I want to write that intersects with Earth in some way, because that's another thing that if it's an idea that relies upon Earth, I just do not include it in the Cosmere for obvious reasons, and so those just all get filed away, and eventually they worm their way out into various stories. Not all of them, unfortunately. I shouldn't say all.
Too many ideas, not enough time.
Yeah, I recently had this. I was talking about it on a podcast where I realized, like, when I was younger, I don't know if you had ever had this. When I was younger, I'm like, oh, I want that idea someday. And now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, oh, I have a finite number of stories I can write. I probably won't get to that one someday.
And yet, weirdly, I have had several instances of me thinking, there's not a whole lot to that idea. It's not actually all that cool. I'll probably never get around to it. And then suddenly it goes, whoop, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
You've got substance. We're doing this, I guess.
More questions?
So about that last question that you just answered, isn't Stormlight Archive kind of interdimensional?
So by interdimensional, I mean alternate realities. You're right; it is interdimensional in that there's layers of there's the cognitive realm and there's the spiritual realm. But I was meaning specifically like multiverse sort of theory, where it's like we can go to an alternate reality of our universe where a different decision was made and things like that. I just don't want to open that can of worms. Wheel of Time does a whole bunch of that, and I think does some really interesting things with it. It's just not a direction I wanted to go in the Cosmere.
Yeah, like portal stones.
Yeah, portal stones and all kinds of things, Eelfin and Aelfin and all sorts of interesting things.
And plus, My Little Pony already did it.
Yeah. Well, and both Marvel and DC are doing it right now, and so it's like they've done it for a long time. And you can just, if you read comics, you can look back and say, wow, that caused problems. That caused so many problems. And time travel's the same way, right? Once you open that open, which again, the comics have shown, but also the books have shown, once you open that door, that becomes the door that you have to now deal with in every story, which is, why, yeah.
I just finished a time travel trilogy, and it nearly killed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can do great stuff with it, but it has to be, like, introducing it into another continuity, I think often ruins that continuity.
Especially if it's something where the story that you're telling was not originally about
Yeah.
the time travel or whatever, but now you've brought it in, and it's like, it tends to work better if that's the thing you're writing about, rather than a side note.
You need to silo it really carefully.
And talk about, creating a magic system or a speculative fiction system that has to have limits and costs. If time travel doesn't, it takes over everything. And so you really have to assign costs and limits to the time travel.
Yep.
One thing I wondered about when I heard the topic of this panel was the Mistborn series. When you mentioned the cost to it, I thought, oh, Mistborn's a great example of it. And I wondered if you could address or explain how the magic system in Mistborn series would apply for this panel. Is it
obviously not genetic, or
It is genetic. It's a genetic magic system. So, so for those who aren't familiar, Mistborn does have powers. You have to be born with them. But one aspect of the system is you can kill people and steal them, which is kind of the let's make this a little more egalitarian in an evil way. But Mistborn is at its core, you get the powers genetically. But it's an economics-based magic system. You have a certain resource, kind of the same sort of way Dune pioneered this. It's the idea of there's an economic aspect to it, and you have to get a hold of these substances, metals, and Mistborn, and you can run out. So, and things like this, and so the economics of it are part of what makes it fun. But it is. My big genetic magic system. It's the one in the Cosmere that is the primarily genetic. And it means that because I'm writing epic fantasy, I have to deal, I feel like, with the implications of that as I move forward. And so the second era, we're kind of dealing with in those books the idea of this creates some problems for society, and it creates some serious inequality beyond what even exists in our world, and it has dangerous questions that I have to deal with because of the type of story I'm telling. I don't think that every epic fantasy has to, but yeah. Just, I should say those capital I implications are at the forefront of my mind. If you haven't read the Mistborn series, the first series is epic fantasy, the second is urban fantasy, and the third is 1980s level spy thrillers. And the things that you can in an epic fantasy be like, oh, it's kings and magic and wizards. We don't have to worry about eugenics. But when you're writing in a 1980s level, you've got to ask those questions. I feel like it's just natural from the type of story I'm building.
Or you can just distract them with Wayne changing hats.
Yeah, Wayne changing hats. Wayne changing hats is our Fast and the Furious, let's jump this car sort of moment. Oh, you don't pay attention to that jumping car.
Suddenly a totally different person. Would there be a huge difference between being born with something like it's part of who you are, you're getting it from somewhere, and something that has an origination point, like you took something that gave you powers, and your kids have that power because of DNA, but it's not like inherently inborn. It came from somewhere. It's not just a part of you. Like, what would be the huge difference in that? Like, how would you approach that?
I feel like the difference to me would be almost time scale. If it's like my mom got bit by a radioactive spider and so I too have spider powers, that's different than I come from a long lineage of spider people. I think that honestly would be where it feels different to me. Is it like, within living memory that this happened, as opposed to I just, this is what my family has always been.
Yeah, that sort of story, I mean, that instantly adds some interesting aspects to it that I think family dynamic-wise would be really fun to write about. It just depends the type of story you want to write. Like we talk about the dollar and things like this. If you just imagine that you're setting aside a certain amount of that for your magic system, the question of where did I get the magic, is that part of the conflict of your story? Like the one that you just described, you got the magic because your mom or dad did something, then family drama, if that's a major aspect of your story, or at least dealing with the sort of the baggage that you might have had from being raised in a certain way or something like that, if that's something you want to deal with, then suddenly that magic system, you've spent some money to make it, it's a little more difficult to explain, but you get so much out of it because it relates to the specific conflict of the story that you're telling. If that's not interesting to you, then maybe just having it just be family, genetic in another way would be a stronger way to tell the story because you're not using that 20 cents there, you use it somewhere else.
Right. But there are emotional implications for the characters as well. It's the difference between, say, being brought up in a certain faith, on the one hand, and coming from a family where you can say, yeah, my grandmother was a doctor and my mother was a doctor and now I'm a doctor and maybe my kid will be. And there's a different sort of emotional attachment to the faith than there is to the thing that they're choosing to become. And if you think about it in those terms, you can start thinking about how it affects your characters and their emotional life.
I did actually play in two D&D games, one of which was the kids of the adventurers from the first game. And so one of the PCs in the second game had Spellfire because her mother was my PC from the previous one, who was a high-level wizard and was casting a whole lot of spells and didn't realize she was pregnant at the time. And so we're like channeling massive arcane energies, through your body, including the fetus. What fun things can we do with that? Like, that was kind of the approach we took.
Don't the spells come with like a label warning?
Yeah, the Surgeon General should get on that. Yeah. But yeah, so I agree that it's what's the story you're spinning out of that? There's so many fun things to do with it.
Man, that warning label. Warning, using these spells while pregnant may result in giving birth to the chosen one.
Yes. There's a short story in that at least.
This idea is not intended for use by small children.
So, I haven't come up with like the specific question in my mind, but I'm curious about like broken magic systems. I think Brandon, you mentioned like if you run into a situation where the magic system isn't working, like change the magic system before the book is published or change the situation. Have any of y'all ever been in a situation where a book has already been published and you've run into a situation where the magic system is now broken / like what would you, and like in like book 2, you can't go back and be like, just kidding. How would you handle that, I guess?
Yeah. JR woke up.
I will say this is a problem for more than just magic systems. Like anything in the story, you get further in this series, you're like, I really wish I could go revise that line in the first book, but I can't. Okay.
So if it's just one line, it depends on the level of it. Sometimes we change it. We just like. This happened to me not with magic systems, but with timeline issues where, I did in the first Stormlight book a bunch of mentions of timelines in a series where I'm writing serious long flashback sequence for each character. And I got to a flashback sequence for character, and I'm like, I wrote this out, and they're like, in my editor, Peter, it's like, I think this contradicts this line. We looked at it, and we're like, we're just changing that line because, you do your best, but when you're trying to seed things for 6 years later, you can say you can change a month to a year or whatever like that, and I don't think people care about that. But serious magic system stuff. Here's just a helpful bit of advice for you. Always seed into your magic system. If you're doing a very rule-based one like me, seed into it that it works like science in that this is our best understanding right now. We might discover, the laws of relativity which supersede Newtonian physics as we understand them. That can always happen. And I've been kind of careful in my books because I had some of these things, again, in those unpublished novels that I could go back and change. But later when I was getting published, I'm like, I can't do that anymore. I started to put in we don't understand this. This is the best we got right now. But the more you're treating your story, your magic like science, the more you can lean on the things that happen in real science, such as we find out that there are laws that supersede laws we knew before, and that's just really handy. So
I would say also because I come from the anthropological side of thinking about things, but there are also variant traditions or things that break the orthodoxy and they do things in a different way, and just there's a lot of variation in real culture. Why not in the magic as well? Sure.
I mean, even in when I started Mistborn, I specifically had characters say, we don't know how this one works. This makes no sense to us. And I knew where I was going at that one, but it was also there to be, these people aren't, they're the experts in the world they know, but they are not mouthpieces for the world builder saying this is 100% how it works. They are using the powers to the best of their ability. Just make sure you don't undermine the emotional investment that the reader has put and the mental effort the reader has put into trying to follow and become we read, this is a soapbox, we read epic fantasy, in my opinion, because partially a sense of immersion, but also we like being experts in things. We are nerdy people who really like digging in deep, and we like being experts. A lot of us at this convention are fans of the Wheel of Time because it let us be experts in a world. And that's, sequels. Like, you put a lot of work into reading that first epic fantasy book. You want some time to coast on your expertise. And if the reader is the author is flagrantly mocking your own expertise and the emotional and mental investment you put into the series, you're only going to last so long.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I mean, the way I've handled it is, say, in the Thief Taker series, it's very clear from the start that Ethan is still learning his craft. And there are others who he turns to now and then for advice and for ways to do things because he doesn't know how to do them. And the fact that he doesn't know everything, not nearly, gives me a lot of leeway for developing new, because as much as we want the rules to be immutable, we also don't want it to be static over the course of several books, because then that becomes predictable and boring. And so you want to build in breathing space for your systems, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't violate exactly what Brandon was just talking about.
All right. We are at time, so closing thoughts?
This stuff's fun. I like having panels on it, so thank you for letting me have a panel to talk about the weird intricacies of magic systems.
Yeah, yay magic. It's
Yeah.
fun.
Yep.